Welcome to Uncopyable Women in Sales. If you're looking for actionable insights and real-world tools to turbocharge your sales starting tomorrow, well, you're in the right place. Your host, Kay Miller, earned the affectionate nickname Muffler Mama when she sold more automotive mufflers than anyone else in the world. In this podcast, Kay will talk to another superstar woman in sales as they reveal uncopyable strategies you can use to rack up more leads, snag dream clients, and take your sales numbers through the roof. Stay tuned and get ready to make more sales and how about this? More money.
Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Kristie Jones. Kristie is a speaker and author of the soon-to-be released book, Selling Your Way In. Kristie helps sales leaders and professionals build their pipelines, improve closing rates, and achieve their sales targets. Her speeches help salespeople leverage their sales superpowers to unleash their full potential. Kristie, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited about our conversation today.
Yes, me too. And I love the name of your book, Selling Your Way In, which we will be talking about during our interview. But why don't you get us started and tell us how you got into sales in the first place?
Yeah, a couple of paths. One, I affectionately say, and I talk about it in the book, that I got my MBA at the kitchen table. My parents owned a Coldwell Banker franchise. And so my dad was the owner broker, and my mom, after 13 years of teaching English and Spanish, quit teaching and got her real estate license over a summer and became one of the top agents in town. So our dinner table conversation revolved around showings and listings and buyers and sellers and commission checks. And and money was a very transparent topic at our house, unlike a lot of folks growing up. So, I knew when my dad was and wasn't taking a paycheck, if he had to make payroll or pay my mother's quarterly taxes. And I knew every check my mother ever made, every commission check. So, I have a younger brother, and we no doubt that we both fell into sales based on organically. He took my mother's path and became a very successful individual contributor in the staffing world, and I took my father's path as a sales leader. So I think that was definitely thing number one. And then I tell people my favorite sales job to this day is still waiting tables. I thought the best job ever because you got instant feedback in the form of tips/commission. And so after every table, you got a chance to better yourself. Not everybody tipped appropriately, but there are so many lessons that I have learned, and so many of us worked our way through high school and college waiting tables as I did, that there are so many similarities between waiting tables. I can go down the list, but what you sell matters, the section that you have, territory matters, what section you were assigned. Back in the day, I'm so old that we had a smoking section.
Oh, no.
In the restaurant that nobody wanted.
Me too. And I was actually a waitress for a while too. And I loved it.
Yeah. And it was, fast paced, personality packed, all of that. So I think those were really, there was definitely those two things that formed my relationship with sales. And then, I got out of college and went into retail sales. So I was a buyer for a major department store. And so I spent some time in retail sales, but I really almost everything I did all along the way, including those high school jobs, were all sales related.
And you're obviously a natural. I can tell already. You're enthusiastic. And if you have something that you love, you want to help people, right?
Yes. Yes.
So as you have been a sales trainer, and not only your own experience, but you've observed other salespeople, I know you talk a lot about the fact that we all have a superpower. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to start out by talking about first, what separates the top 10% from the 90% in sales?
Yeah, I think it's the things that the other 90% I think are either, not important or hogwash, if you will. I ask this one question anytime I interview a sales candidate, and it's so if you interview with me, this is definitely coming up, so be prepared. And the question is, tell me 3 things that you do consistently, regardless of the job or the company that you're working for, that you believe will make you successful if you are doing these 3 things consistently. And top 10%ers say things like, I have a spiritual practice. I'm at the gym every morning by 6. I put my phone down 2 hours a day so I can be present with my family. I have an advisory circle and we meet regularly over beer to discuss our careers. So the 10% understand that it's not the hard skills or the aptitude towards what you're doing. And this is almost any profession, right? And then the other 90, I use this example. I say, you're sitting next to Susan and I'm like, I'm saying what Susan's saying, but I'm not getting the results that Susan's getting. And I don't understand why. It's because the work that gets to the top doesn't actually happen at work. It happens outside of work. And what you don't see is what Susan's doing between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m.
Right. And in most of the sales women I've talked to, I should say female sales professionals are lifelong learners.
Yes.
They read, they listen to a podcast. And because you are listening to this podcast, you are in that group. And yes, those disciplines, I like to work out. I have struggled since the pandemic because I used to go to the gym and do spin at the insane hour of 5:45 a.m., which I couldn't believe people did that until I started doing it and I got addicted. I do have a gratitude app on my phone. So I'm not perfect at those things, but I really do believe in the value of those. And I know because you said exercise is a big thing.
I did. Yeah.
There are some very consistent things that successful salespeople do, successful people do. And it's important to prioritize that and keep working on that. So let's talk about the superpower. I'm fascinated by that concept. And I like the fact that you say, how can someone identify their own superpower? Because as I mentioned before we started the recording, I've been talking with so many different sales people and everyone's different. And of course, the women I'm talking to are all very successful, but everything, their style, their personality, their, methodology may be very different. So tell us about how we as salespeople can identify our superpower.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not sure, there's some questions I'm going to give you about that, but I want to make sure that everybody understands that your superpower is not just a strength. The definition of superpower is that it's something that gives you a significant advantage over others. And so, it's not just something that you do well, but it gives you a significant advantage. And so if you're not sure what your superpower is, it's questions such as, what seems to come easy for me, but hard for others? What do people come and ask me advice about? What seems to come naturally to me? What do I love doing? What do others call out as things that I do well? Like what are, if somebody says, wow, you're really good at that. And then, if asking yourself all of those questions doesn't elicit your superpower, then I would encourage you to ask family and friends because I bet they know. So sometimes we are blinded to superpowers because they just, again, if they come naturally to you or they're easy to you, it doesn't maybe seem like it's something that could give you a significant advantage. I was in my 40s until I recognized one of my superpowers, and that superpower is generosity. And it was something that I had done for years. I say my motto is I've got 30 minutes for everyone and do the right things and the right things will happen. And so, I said for years, people have taken me up on that. I got serious about it. And I was like, no, I'm happy to review your resume. I'm happy to talk to you about career advice. I'm happy to help you prep for the big interview. And I have a journalism degree, so I'm even happy to edit that Dear John email to your soon to be ex. So, I've got people take me up on this about 3 or 4 times a week. Somebody asks for 30 minutes of my time. And my answer is, of course, I have 30 minutes for everyone. And that the universe conspired to take that superpower, and it brought a bunch of very interesting things into my life because I kept saying, yes, I have 30 minutes for you. And that was 8 years ago, I started my own business. And it was a series of saying yes to people and doing them a favor, as people would call it. And that all led to me starting my consulting business, which was not on the radar.
Well, and I'm sure being generous, like you said, it opens a lot of doors, and it's karma. It's karma number one. But when you do something nice for other people, of course, they want to do it back. So, that's a great superpower to have. What are some of the other superpowers that you find in salespeople that really serve them well?
Yeah, I just did a keynote with Crunchbase, the sales and marketing folks at Crunchbase, and things that I kind of did expect to hear. That I hear a lot. I'm a good listener. Listening is my superpower. Asking questions is my superpower. Some people said vulnerability was their superpower. So I think sometimes when we think about, because I sometimes couch it as a sales superpower. If I want you to get sort of specific about your, my sales superpower, would be asking questions. My son says I'm nosy, but I prefer naturally curious. uh, but if you think just like, it's amazing how my universal superpower, if you will, of generosity plays well in all spaces, right? But I think a lot of folks read, like, I talked to another friend the other day and he's like, I just read people well. Like, I can read you and I know how to communicate with you. I just have to hear a few sentences out of your mouth to know how to effectively communicate with you. The psychology of sales is understanding people is absolutely a superpower. And I think, that's something that I think, somebody asked me earlier today what my favorite sales book was. And I said, anything that Brene Brown writes, because it's all about psychology. And we don't spend enough time. We spend a lot of time reading how-to books. But sales is all about psychology. The art of sales is all about psychology. So yeah, I think sometimes your universal superpower could be your sales superpower. Not only, and I think your sales superpower, my sales superpower of being a good questioner and being naturally curious, sometimes will irritate some in my life, as my son would say, but he's like, enough with the questions already. But like, I really am naturally curious. I want to know everything about everything. Like, I think people are fascinating and what they do is fascinating. And so I just think it's so interesting what people have chosen to do with their life and the path that they've taken.
Well, first of all, we all irritate our children. And I speak from experience. Oh my gosh. It's so funny. You can say something and someone else can say something.
Oh yes,
and it's taken very differently. I love the curiosity part. Are you a Ted Lasso fan by chance?
I am. Wait, yes. My this is one thing my son and I do agree on is Ted
Lasso. And you remember the scene where Ted Lasso's character, or Jason Sudeikis' character talks about curiosity and played a dart game against kind of this rival. And he smoked him, right? And afterwards he said, you never asked, you never found out if I was good at darts. And so that was a memorable scene, and that show was just really awesome. But I love the old Dale Carnegie, which is How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it's just so much about listening. And I think salespeople, that's probably the one thing that we're the worst at. A lot of us are very gregarious, and a lot of us are excited about what we're selling for good reason.
Right.
But we're not learning when we're talking.
That's right.
I actually just read a book by Larry King, master interviewer, and he said his favorite question is why. And so being curious is huge, and learning as much as you can from the customer. And besides asking your friends and family, how would you explore what that is?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, it developed at an early age and you didn't catch it. When I think about generosity being my superpower, I think back to high school, and I used to jokingly say that at night the phone lines were open for my friends to call and cry with Kristie. I was that person who, I'm not super emotional. I'm very level-headed. I said, in case of emergency, you should put my name and phone number down. Almost everyone should, because I put my business hat on and I go to work. But it was funny because people would reach out to me like for advice about, boyfriend breakups and fights, and parents grounding them for sneaking out the second floor window, and bad grades on the test. And how do I tell my parents? I just seem to have been that person that people felt confident in coming to me. And so that superpower was a strength, but I didn't even recognize it. It was just part of my DNA. It was just what I was doing. I never thought that it was anything special, that my friends trusted me and my advice and thought I was level-headed enough to ask some of the important life questions at 16. But that never changed. And even today, I have certain friends even from high school that still call and say, I gotta talk to you about, I need some help. Like, I don't know what to do about this. And so I do think I think it's generosity, but it's also the other superpowers would be, I'm level-headed in crisis. I'm a professional firefighter in most times, and I can kind of see what action needs to be taken. And sometimes, I have to be careful because a lot of times, again, going back to my precious boy, he now knows to call. I mean, we've been together 24 years, so he's smarter than he used to be. But now he calls about frustration about something. He goes, now I'm just calling to vent. I don't need solutions.
That also sounds very familiar.
Yeah, I go immediately into problem solving mode. And so he'll be like, so he knows. And we had a conversation because he got frustrated with me. And I said, I just react. Like, this is what I do. Like, this is what I do for a living. People pay me to solve problems. And I said, so I don't know I said, you have to, so he knows now to say, I'm calling because I had a really bad day at work and I just need to tell you what happened. I'm like, oh, let me get a glass of wine then.
Today's podcast is sponsored by the acclaimed book, Uncopyable Sales Secrets, How to Create an Unfair Advantage and Outsell Your Competition by Kay Miller. If you want to make more sales, you need to read this book. We'll even get you started with a free download of the first 2 chapters. Go to uncopyablesales.com/chapters to grab this offer right now.
These superpowers remind me of a buzzword right now, which is authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Authenticity. And that's something that I think really is important because, our customers, our prospects can tell when we're not being honest and authentic. So knowing yourself allows you to be yourself, right? With your prospects and clients in an honest way. So I think that's a very valuable take on this.
The first section of my book is called just that. You have to know yourself before you get to know your prospect. And that's where I do talk about sales secret weapons and sales superpowers and the like. But yeah, if you're not in tune with you, right? And then, I think of 2 people come to mind right away. I actually just got off of a Zoom call with the author of Authentic Selling. And then Larry Levine's book, Selling from the Heart, right? Also comes to mind immediately. And I do think that, I like to tell a story that this goes back to my do the right things and the right things will happen mantra. But when I was working my last W-2 job before I started my company, I was a director of SDR team. And I didn't realize at the time, but when I pulled everybody off the floor for the weekly sales meeting, and I didn't realize that when everybody's off the floor and the phone rings into the sales department, that if nobody answers, it lands in my voicemail. And so I got back from the sales meeting and there was a voicemail from a potential prospect who actually happened to be local in St. Louis. And so I was doing some research and I was like, you know what? I'm not sure he's really our ICP. I'm going to call him back myself. So I did call him back and I listened to him. And then I told him that I didn't think he was ready for us and that we were, too complex of a software program for him and that he didn't have enough, probably enough reps to justify it. And I gave him the names of some lesser complicated competitors that were going to cost him a lot less money. And I said, when you get to X, call me back, then we can talk. And it was within a few months after that I started my own business. And he reached out to me on LinkedIn and wanted to talk. I had no recollection. Okay, I had no idea who he was. Like the name didn't.
Oh, really?
His name, his face, his business, nothing. It was about 6 or 8 months after that. I had no recollection. And so I was embarrassed. Like I scheduled time with him and I did all my homework. I tried to do all my homework and I still couldn't figure out why he'd reached out other than he was local. And so when I got on the phone, I said, I'm super embarrassed. I said, you seem to know who I am. And I said, I don't know who you are. And he said, he's like, I talked to you when you were at this company and you wouldn't sell me any software. And then immediately I knew who he was. And I was like, oh, I said, I'm surprised that you were following my journey. He goes, you're the only salesperson who's refused to sell me anything ever.
Really? Well, and that speaks to that you will only sell the right thing, right? It's your
and I think
reputation on the line.
That's right. And he became a year-long client and he became the biggest financial client I had that year. And I told people, I said, I'm not lucky. Like I lead a really blessed life, but I'm not lucky. I do the right things by people. I do the right, I make the right decisions. I've made the right career advancements. Sure, I've made some mistakes along the way, but in general, I think people know I think people know right from wrong. I think they know what the right thing to do and the right answer is. And not everyone's a fit for what you sell. Not everybody's ready for what you sell. And so, I think I just continue to go back to, my authentic mantra is do the right things and the right things will happen. And I think the universe has rewarded me time and time again for doing that.
One of the things I talk about in my book, which is Uncopyable Sales Secrets, is going back to the basics. It ties into what you're saying about doing the right thing. One of my clients was just saying that one of the keys to her success is just following up with people and doing what she says she will do. And she's shocked at how many times people will, pick up the phone and say, "Oh, thanks for calling me back." And
she walked her all because she just walked her talk as if it was some special superpower. Right.
And it's comical almost because thanks for calling me back, calling a prospect back. That's a no-brainer. But it's true. I mean, building that trust and building that relationship, that rapport, letting them know that they're important is really key. And sometimes it sounds very basic, but like my husband likes to say, common sense isn't common. So
Yeah, I say everybody wants to be a special snowflake.
so let's talk a little bit more about your book, which I'm very excited about. We actually coincidentally both have books that are scheduled to publish in August. Our next book is Uncopyable You, which is a branding book.
Nice.
Your book is Selling Your Way In. I love that title. So let's talk a little bit more about the book and that philosophy.
Yeah. The subtitle really is kind of the tagline there, which is the playbook for setting your income and owning your life. So I think if you've chosen to be in sales, and by the way, the majority of you didn't choose to be in sales, you were accidental sales professionals, right? You fell into sales one way or another.
Exactly.
But if you put yourself in that position, then I find that a lot of times people put themselves in the wrong role within a sales career. And so I time and time again walk into companies and I'm like, and I said, so you got to really ask yourself. I think most people are not intentional or proactive about their career pathing. I call it step changes, knowing what your step change is. I think most people are reactive, like a recruiter calls you or you lose your job or, you're mad at your boss and, they cut your territory in half and now you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. But I think so many of the career decisions that we make in sales as opposed to other, industries and other careers are reactionary and not proactive or intentional. And so, the role you take, what you sell, what industry you're in, what company you work for, what size of company you work for and what size of company you sell into, the boss that you choose. Like, I think sometimes sales professionals always feel like, we're at the mercy of the hiring manager, the hiring person. And I'm here to say the top 10 percenters don't feel that way. The top 10 percenters are very intentional. They know that, I don't have this box checked on my resume. So the next step change for me needs to check that box because I've got 2 more steps and I can't get to those other 2 steps if I haven't checked this next box. And so they're very deliberate and intentional about how they're progressing through their career pathing. And so I just really think that people don't take it, or no one's spending enough time. Like those of us who own businesses and you get this, we use this like we're spending too much time working in the business and not enough time working on the business. I don't think sales professionals are spending any time in some cases, working on figuring out what they really want. There's all kinds, again, I mentioned early on that my mother was in a 100% commission sales role, right? My dad's income was dependent on the agents underneath him performing well, and that's a small margin business. People complain about the 6% that you have to pay when you sell a house. But if you think about, that's just not going to the agent right? I mean, like you got an office to upkeep, you've got all kinds of expenses, you've got administrative people. I know that better than anybody. That is a low margin business. But again, do you want to be in a 100% commission? Do you want to be in a 50-50 base in commission? Do you want to be in an 80-20? Do you want to, sell into, do you want to be in channel? Do you want to be in customer success? What about sales engineer or solution consultant? Implementation specialist is under the sales umbrella, in my opinion. So I think the more that you find what fits your sales superpower, secret weapons, and, plays to all of those type of strengths, the more likely it is that you can control your income. And what I mean by that is, you can ask for more money than they're offering. You can ask for other perks. I call it a player privilege. And so you can ask for things. Everything is negotiable. Just because they're paying Susan 8% commission doesn't mean they wouldn't pay you 12. Right. And so when you're a top 10 percenter, you get a player privilege. You have the opportunity to ask for things that other people don't have an opportunity to ask for, which allows you to control your income and then build the life that you want to have.
You have been on Lori Richardson's podcast, which is Conversations with Women in Sales.
Yep.
And she points out that women are often more reluctant to stand up for themselves and ask for what they want. Do you see that happening in your experience?
Absolutely. And for a variety of reasons. First off, a lot of women don't do conflict well, and they see that as conflict, right? As negotiation is conflict. Asking for what you want is conflict. We're sort of even in this day and age, I find myself still cooking dinner, right? when my son comes over, I wouldn't ask, he just shows up unexpectedly from time to time, and he's like, hey, and I'm like, hey, and the first, right. And the first thing out of my mouth is, have you had dinner? Right. The first thing out of his mouth isn't, have you had dinner?
Right. That's a mom thing for sure.
Right. Yeah. You never ask if I have had dinner, but I think, again, as a nurturer and those type of things, I think we're built to do some of that. I'm part of the Women's Sales Pro group. And so I spend a lot of time every year with Lori in person. And we as women have this conversation. There's about 45 of us. And when we get together once a year at our conference, we have this conversation ad nauseum. So much so that I'll share my Post-it with you.
Oh.
That my Post-it from...
Okay, it's hard to read though.
Yeah, it says scary plus 20%. So when I bid things, I'm supposed to bid it at scary. And then I'm supposed to add 20% more, because that will get me to the man number.
Interesting.
Yeah, that credit goes to Joanne Black, I believe. And yes, she is scary. She is the scary. And I joined the group in 2019, and that's when I first heard it and wrote it on that Post-it. So when I bid projects with the companies that I work with, I have to think about that, because and I say, like, if I get that agreement signed and returned within an hour, then I know I missed the scary plus 20 mark.
Exactly. And it is surprising. I've had some situations where I asked for the scary plus 20%, I suppose, and they didn't
right.
blink. And then you're thinking, oh my gosh,
that should have been scary plus 50.
Leaving all this on the table.
Yeah.
And
I think, and again, and part of it's just, I think part of it we're not going to overcome. I hate to say that, but part of it, I think we won't overcome for a variety of reasons. We didn't enter the workforce as soon as men did. So like, we're still some decades behind where they were at, because of how long men have been the breadwinners of their family in society. But we need to be asking, and then we need to be negotiating. We need to be willing to walk away. Like, I finally had my first hard no the other day. They wanted me to come in and do a day-long training in Chicago when they were getting together for their SKO. And I said, here's my hourly rate. And they were like, oh. And I was like, okay. And I didn't flinch, right? I mean, it's my hourly rate. Like, it's what other people pay. It's the value that I bring to the table. It's, going to Chicago in the middle of the winter. It's, you might have been able to get $8,000 out of me if it was Florida, but if you want me to go to Chicago in January, no. And so, like, I think that's the other thing, is that I think women are also conditioned to give in, and to be willing to negotiate or take less than, because we've just sort of been conditioned to do so. And so it's something that I'm so grateful for the group of women that I belong to that organization, and that we get together regularly, and I'm in part of a mastermind with other women in that group, so that we can challenge each other, because, we need to say, like, my accountability partner the other day did a keynote speech in Florida. They paid for everything. And I said, can I ask what you charge? And she told me, and I said, you didn't charge enough. And she's like, well, I know, but they're putting this really nice. I go, they would put anybody up at that nice resort. They're not going to put you at the Super 8 or the Motel 6. Like, whoever was going to be at that. That's the host hotel. Of course they're going to put you at the host hotel. That's just the cost of doing business. I said, you could have absolutely gotten more money. And, and she's like, I know, but it's I go, da-da-da-da-da. Here we go again. Here we go. I know, but I haven't done this one before. And I go, sorry. That's why I'm your accountability partner. And so we need to hold each other accountable to, asking our worth in dollars and cents.
Right. And when we talk about hourly, what your hourly rate is, or what your speaking rate is, they're not paying for that time. They're paying for all the knowledge that you have,
That's right.
all the experience that you're sharing, the value, the change that you're going to make in your business. And yeah, sometimes we'll say, how much are you charging for an hour? I'm like, this isn't like I'm working 40 hours a week and getting that every hour.
Right.
This is,
well, it wasn't. That's my day rate, but I was going to have to do as much work in prep. It was going to be 8 to 12 hours in prep just to do the 8 hours of training, right?
Right.
So not everybody thinks about that either. They think you're just going to show up and this is all just in your head. And I'm like, no, in order for me to be memorable, in order for this to work, in order for it to be sticky, in order for them to walk away with value, that takes prep.
So tell us a little bit more about selling your way in. And of course, how can we get that book?
Yeah. So you can go to sellingyourwayin.com and sign up. And first off, it's pre-ordering now. So, Barnes & Noble, Target, wherever you get books, all of those places that you get books, It is available right now for pre-order. So I'm actively promoting pre-ordering of the book. But it really is I'm calling it not a sales book. I'm actually calling it a professional development book for sales professionals, because I think that's really what it is. It's not a how-to. I chose not to write a how-to. I think there are plenty of people out there doing that and doing it well. And I really wanted to say, you too can get to the top 10%, but if you're willing to, you're going to have to make some sacrifices. You're going to have to make some changes. Like you mentioned about lifelong learning. I'm like, you may have to read a business book instead of watch The Bachelor from time to time. But I'm a competitive athlete and I have been my whole life. So the third section of the book is all about, I call it the woo-woo. It's all about visualization and positive self-talk and affirmations and afformations and all of those type of things. Because I do believe, I read a new book over Thanksgiving. Actually, I listened to it because I'm an Audible girl. I don't read anything anymore. Called, I think, The Great Little Book of Afformations, not affirmations. And so I have stopped doing affirmations, which I was doing, and now I'm doing afformations. You mentioned gratitude journal or a gratitude app. That's another one of those things, a spiritual practice, a religious practice, like something bigger than you, something that you can connect with. But I want people to think differently about their lives. And, you can be, I want you to get sales training. I'm not advocating for that. I want you to be, I want you to get, I'm frustrated that the art of science, or the art of sales has gone by the way of the science of sales. We're now flip the script. We're too data driven. We've got all this AI and we've got all this automation, and the art of sales is going by the wayside. So I want you to get sales soft skills training. I really do. But that's not what's going to get you to the top. Knowing how to do an interactive demo or how to negotiate a deal or whatever, that's not going to get you to the top. You have to be in, like my mother used to call it fighting shape. Like, let's get in fighting shape, eating well, sleeping 8 hours, exercising, being connected to something bigger than you. I believe your circle matters. I believe in reason, season, lifetime. Not everybody gets to stay the whole time. Not everybody should stay the whole time. You've got to weed the garden, now and then. If people, people will fall off when you get on a journey and that journey makes other people uncomfortable. They'll either try to disrail your journey, or they'll jump off the train on their own. But it's not again, and getting to the top 10% isn't for everybody, because there are sacrifices that have to be made, and you might not be willing to do. You may just at the end of the night want to watch The Bachelor, which is totally fine.
That's your choice. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to watch something, maybe The Bachelor's highly entertaining and doesn't take a lot of brain power.
Well, I did watch The Golden Bachelor because
I didn't watch that, but I should have, because that was my demographic.
It was very interesting. It was a novelty, and it was fun to watch. But I think your book sounds fantastic. I can't wait. I will go ahead and pre-order it right away.
Thank you.
And I encourage you listening to also order Selling Your Way In. Kristie, the time has flown by. I really, really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing all of this wisdom and some perspectives that I think can help every listener on the call. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our discussion.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Uncopyable Women in Sales, your source for secrets you can use to make more sales. Check the show notes for links and contact information. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please spread the word by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a 5-star review. You can always learn more by going to uncopyablesales.com/podcast. Until next time, go out and supercharge your sales like a true uncopyable rock star.